Good morning. Welcome to the midweek edition of your breakfast show, Leadership Television inside Nigeria. Today is Wednesday, November 19, 2025. And of course, my name is Winifred Ugbebo, your host on the program. Without wasting much time, of course, we're a little behind schedule. We head up to Leadership newspaper, the nation's most influential newspaper. Let's see what it has on its menu this Wednesday. It's still a developing story on the KEBBI schoolgirls abduction. Of course, is a story from one of the slain teacher that was killed during the abduction. She recounts our deal, how my husband was killed, slain teacher's wife recounts. Security operatives ignored Department of State Services intelligence. According to sources, remain calm, students will be released, Army Chief Governor say. And that story continues on page 4 of Leadership. Perhaps we'll just take some snippets from that leading story on leadership. And it's also gracing the cover of other papers we have in our lineup this Wednesday. Let's go first and see what Leadership is saying about the ordeal of the slain teacher's wife as she recounts her tale. We head up to page 4 of Leadership for that. The widow of a teacher who was also the chief security officer of Government Girls Comprehensive Secondary School in Maga, Kebbi State, Amina Hassan Makuku, has explained how her husband was shot dead in her presence. Amina said her world crumbled on Monday morning when the bandits stormed their residence on the school premises, killed her husband, and abducted 25 schoolgirls. She said the sound of the gunfire and screams still echoes in her mind, adding that the pain of losing her loved one is overwhelming. It was at about 4 a.m. on Monday when my husband and I were in bed, Amina recounted, her voice trembling with grief. We heard the entrance door being opened and I woke up my husband thinking it was just goats. But then armed men burst into our room, asked him to take them to the school hostel and shot him when he refused. Amina's eyes welled up with tears as she recalled the tragic moment. I rushed to hold him, but they pushed me aside and continued to the hostel. I don't know how they managed to abduct the girls, but I heard the screams and cries. It's been a nightmare, she said, her voice shaking with sorrow. Lawa Atine, a father of 3 students in the school, is anxiously waiting for news about his daughters. One of my daughters, Khadija, escaped by hiding in a toilet. She was lucky, but 2 of my other daughters are still missing. I'm worried sick about them, he said, his eyes welling up with tears. Another parent, Fatima Ibrahim, expressed her desperation. I just want my daughter back. I don't care about anything else. Please just bring her back home safely, she pleaded, her voice cracking with emotion. These are excerpts from today's leading story, a developing one at that, on the KEBBI schoolgirls abduction. Of course, they were 25. Meanwhile, today's leading story is on the slain teacher's wife recount narration of the ordeal that took place on Monday morning. How my husband was killed, slain teacher's wife recounts. We move ahead to other stories gracing the cover of Leadership this Wednesday. We have Senate 6 recruitment of 100,000 soldiers, probe of safe school funds. Banks deposit with Central Bank of Nigeria soars to 48.40 trillion naira. Lagos bond subscriptions rise to 310 billion naira. And atop the masthead of on top of the leading story on Leadership today, we have Christian genocide going on in Nigeria. Daniel Oko insists. Daniel Oko is the president of the Christian Association of Nigeria. And of course, during their meeting yesterday in Plateau State, he maintained that Christian genocide is still ongoing in the country. Atop, just beneath the masthead on the business bus of Leadership, we cover this Wednesday. I don't take leadership honor for granted, coming from the FIROS chairman, that is Federal Inland Revenue Service chairman. We have the picture also gracing the cover. Of course, he's one of during the presentation of the Leadership Award nomination letter to the FRS Executive Chairman as Public Service Person of the Year 2025. His leadership person, Public Service Person of the Year 2025. Congratulations to the FIRS chairman. We have the management team of leadership presenting the nomination award letter to him, and that picture is gracing the cover of Leadership newspaper. Atop the masthead of leadership, People's Democratic Party crisis, governors take over secretariat as Wike's camp express Makinde orders. That story continues on page 7 of leadership. Of course, it's also a leading story in some of the papers we happen to line up today. There's Wednesday. There's no end in sight for PDP's crisis, the main opposition party. Lastly, on the cover of leadership, external reserves hit $46.7 billion, highest since 2018, coming from the Central Bank of Nigeria. That story continues on page 7 of leadership. We move ahead to page 3 of leadership, where we have our stand. Today's stand is on growing insecurity in Kano border towns. Growing insecurity in Kano border towns. Today's stand in leadership. From today's stand, we move to the back page of leadership, where we have Wednesday column with Olufunke Baruwa. And today's column is on praise of bandits, insurgents, and terrorists. Praise of bandits, insurgents, and terrorists. Wednesday column with Olufunke Baruwa. And quote from today's column says, when attackers believe they can strike without consequence, violence becomes self-sustaining. Quote from today's column. And it also says, confronting these menace mistreating insurgency, terrorism, and banditry not as separate crises, but as intertwined threats feeding off the same vacuum of governance, justice, and economic security. Before we leave the back page of leadership this Wednesday, let's visit Ghana Must Go. And on the news, Ned Nwoko says, I don't want Regina Daniels back. And Ghana Must Go ask him, how does that concern us? How does that concern us, Ned Nwoko? And it's on that note we bring to an end the review of Leadership newspaper this Wednesday. Don't forget to visit the website of Leadership newspaper for continuation of these headline stories. We head up to the next paper we have on our lineup, and that is the Punch. Punch has similar story with that of Leadership, developing story on the KEBBI schoolgirls kidnapped. It says survivors relieve night of horror. Hostel staff, slain VP's family, others share chilling accounts. Parents weep. Senate probes 145 billion naira save schools fund. These are kickers to the leading story on today's The Punch newspaper, which is a developing story on the KEBBI 25 schoolgirls kidnap. High stakes face up. PDP governors resist Wike's secretariat takeover. High stakes phase of PDP governors resist Wike's secretariat takeover. Chaos as police tear gas PDP chieftains. Makinde Bala Turaki Wike clash. We have the picture of the clash gracing the cover of the Punch just underneath that second leading story. Pension fund surges to 26 trillion naira. Missing FROSC officer daughter feared killed by Osun herbalist. Rest probe foreign interest in Edo Museum. Rest probe foreign interest in Edo Museum. Yesterday, we read the same Punch carried a story that the U.S. has returned 2 artifacts stolen from Benin Empire during the old Benin Empire. They returned 2. And today, we have seen report that reps are probing foreign interest in Edo Museum. We move ahead to the stories on the Punch newspaper. Beside the masthead, Tinubu gets the SS cleared ambassadorial list. And atop the masthead of the Punch, UN discourse. U.S. envoy Nicki Minaj decry killings in Nigeria. Of course, there's a trending video when she was addressing UN yesterday. Of course, she said Christians, her fellow Christians in Nigeria, can no longer worship the way they are supposed to worship. That story continues on page 7 of the Punch newspaper. Tinubu heads to South Africa, Angola for G20 EU summit. That story takes center spread on page 6 of the Punch newspaper. And lastly, on the cover of the Punch, forest reserves soared to $46.7 billion 7-year high. And that brings also to a close the review of front headline stories on the Punch newspaper this Wednesday. For more, log into the website of the Punch newspaper. We move ahead to the next paper we have on our lineup, and that is This Day. This Day also has same developing story. It says for our government, Tinubu depressed Today's leading story on this day's newspaper, it says Tinubu depressed by students kidnapped, Brigadier General Uba's death. Leading story on this day, federal government, Tinubu depressed by students kidnapped, Brigadier General Uba's death. Assures parents schoolgirls will return safely as Shetima to visit, sympathize with state. Gondos with army over death of soldiers. Governor Idris' failure to act on intelligence made kidnap possible, says his sabotage, accuses unnamed agency. Northern governors express outrage, demand urgent coordinated rescue operations. And the story continues on page 39 of this day. Still on the developing story, like I mentioned earlier, federal government says Tinubu depressed by students kidnapped, Brigadier General Uba's death. On top of that leading story, we have the second leading story on today's This Day newspaper. Bala Mohammed, crisis in PDP fueled by weakest impunity, arrogance. Says FCT minister has vowed opposition party won't form government in 2027. Sheyi Makinde, this is a fight for the future of Nigeria's democracy. ADC condemns attack on PDP headquarters. Weakest faction expects Oyo Bauchi governors judge orders. Party salutes Nigerians for support in resisting attack at Secretariat. Leading story, second leading story on today's This Day front cover. Bala Mohammed, crisis in PDP fueled by weakest impunity, arrogance. We move ahead to the last page stories on the cover of This Day, and these stories are about the masthead. Cardoso, forex stability, disinflation, foreign reserves accretion have restored investor confidence. Reserves rise to $46.7 billion. Shetima Tinubu's reforms massively opening new investment opportunities. Promises Abu Dhabi, Beijing Consortium of Economic Stability, Transparency. And lastly, on the cover of This Day, Form 49 committal proceedings against AMCON officials and lawyers commence. And that stories on pages 14 to 24 of This Day. And that also brings to a close the review of front headline stories on This Day newspaper this Wednesday. For more, log into the website of This Day. We move ahead to the next paper we have on our lineup this Wednesday, and that is The Guardian, talking about the crisis bedeviling the opposition People's Democratic Party, PDP. Fears of one party drift intensify as PDP crisis worsens, turns violent. Leading story on today's The Guardian newspaper. We have the picture of what transpired yesterday beneath that leading story. Fears of one party drift intensify as PDP crisis worsens, turns violent. And the story continues on page 6 of The Guardian. Biafra lobby network fueling Christian genocide campaign in U.S. That's the story that runs on page 3 of The Guardian. Biafra lobby network fueling Christian genocide campaign in U.S. Internet users suffer global disruptions, prolonged glitches. Rest probe oil sector anchor borrowers funds abandoned properties. KEBBI school adoption sets of military push, political backlash, regional alarms. And beneath the masthead of The Guardian, House in rowdy session over INEC's power to monitor party activities. UN world leaders demand faster action on Paris Agreement. ASU rejects federal government's proposed salary increment. And that also brings to a close review of front headline stories on The Guardian this Wednesday. For more, log in to the website of The Guardian newspaper. We move ahead to the next paper we have on our lineup this Wednesday, and that is okay, and that is the Daily Sun newspaper. Daily Sun's leading story today says we are on Tribune. Nigerian Tribune's leading story says PDP's day of tear gas chaos. Makinde, Bala Mohammed, Wike Anyanwu, others clash over Wadata Plaza. There is about to break for a new PDP and for our democracy, Makinde. Enough is enough. PDP does not belong to one person, Bala. New party leadership thanks Nigerians for supporting democracy. Wike-backed faction express Turaki, Mohammed Makinde, Bode George, others dissolves Oyo, Ekiti, Bochi, Lagos Escos. And that story continues on page 3 of Nigerian Tribune, just like the Guardian before it. The main story, main headline story on today's Nigerian Tribune is on PDP's day of tear gas, chaos, as Nigerian Tribune captions it. Technology has ended era of voter impersonation, coming from INEC chairman. Eurobond issuance boosts Nigerians' foreign reserves to $46.7 billion, coming from CBN. And still on Nigerian Tribune, Christians facing genocide in northern Nigeria. Middle belt can break silence. That story runs on page 4 of Nigerian Tribune, just like leadership and the Punch newspaper. Christians facing genocide in northern Nigeria. Middle belt can break silence. The story runs on page 4 of Nigerian Tribune. Invoke your constitutional power for immediate release of Nnamdi Kanu, 44 reps, right Tinubu. That story is on page 13 of Nigerian Tribune. Invoke your constitutional power for immediate release of Nnamdi Kanu, 44 reps, right Tinubu. We move ahead to the stories about the masthead of Nigerian Tribune. KEBBI Schoolgirls Abduction, how my husband was killed, wife of slain VP. This also made the headline story in leadership newspaper and the Punch newspaper this Wednesday. UNICEF First Lady condemn attack, demand students release. The story continues on page 4 of Nigerian Tribune. Again, ASU accuses federal government of non-readiness to meet demands, threatens fresh nationwide strike. The story is on page 21 of Nigerian Tribune. Lastly, on the cover of Nigerian Tribune is their head story, which they promote every day on the cover. And today's story from the head sector: owning cats could double one's risk of schizophrenia, according to study. For those cat lovers, there's a study that says that owning cats could double one's risk of schizophrenia. And that concludes review of front headline stories on Nigerian Tribune this Wednesday. For more, don't forget to log into the website of Nigerian Tribune. Well, viewers, is on this note, we bring to a close today's breakfast show on Leadership Television inside Nigeria. My name is Winifred Ugbebo. I look forward to having you same time, same station for another fresh edition of the program. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for watching. For sponsorship and advert placements, please contact 080-3688-6158. Last Word Leadership Podcast Studio. You have the last word.